This is the Hidden Why Podcast, episode 1001, my interview with Dr. Michael Presti, and we're discussing insights about the opioid crisis. Enjoy. G'day, Michael. Welcome to the Hidden Why Podcast. Great to have you here with me today.
Wonderful to be here. Thanks, Lee.
So I'm glad to have you here. It's a really interesting topic. You might be better than explaining it than I am, but it's about the opioid pandemic, I suppose, and how we can try and prevent opioid overdoses. But what is your work, and explain to us what you do.
Yeah, sure. So I think most of us by now are kind of viscerally aware of how much pain has been caused by the opioid crisis over the last couple of decades in this country. And more so around the world. So yeah, it is truly becoming a pandemic versus a U.S. epidemic. And this is, in this country and largely around the world, we like to find, the kind of silver bullet answer, right? The one sweeping thing that will fix a problem. And yeah. This is an entrenched, complex problem that there's never going to be any kind of a silver bullet one solution to, right? There's just so many dimensions to it. And so, I think what we're trying to do at SafeRX is take more of a root cause analysis approach to looking at what are the main drivers of the crisis and where are the gaps in medical need. In other words, what problems are contributing most to all of this pain and damage that we don't have as physicians or as social workers or counselors or what have you, that we don't have the tools that we need to actually effectively address those dimensions. And what we've done at SafeRX is first focus on a particular dimension of the crisis that has to date gone totally unaddressed by the pharmaceutical industry, which is the combination of opioids with alcohol. Lee, opioids are, I think we all know, they pose a risk, right? There's a risk of respiratory depression. They slow down the central nervous system. And when the dose is too high and the response is too big, that's what causes the body to just kind of fall asleep, forget how to breathe, and never wake up.
So can we just backtrack a sec here? What is this epidemic being caused by? Why is this such an opioid crisis right now, from your angle?
Gosh, great. Such a great question. Well, a lot of this is, I think, squarely, much of the blame falls on a lot of the big pharmaceutical companies that drove the crisis. And this is in the late 1990s, early 2000s. This push towards extended release opioid formulations that were supposed to be much safer for the patient. And so what ended up happening was you got more and more high dose, high potency opioids that were, it's actually quite off-putting when you really look at what happened. So
this is opioids that are given to us from from pharmaceutical companies and doctors saying, hey, here's an opioid, take it, this will help you.
Exactly. And
so it's not off-market sort of opioid use that we're talking about here.
Right. So we're focused on prescription opioid overdose, which really accounts for a shocking proportion of the opioids. When you think that,
Do you know the percentage?
Like all doctors, well, they're changing, and that's actually a very dynamic kind of set of parameters that's leading to that.
Yeah.
And we can dig into that a little bit more in a bit. But when the CDC prescribing guidelines came out back in 2015, which really pushed for a significant reduction in daily doses of opioids to prescribed patients, unfortunately what that did was patients who had been titrated to very high doses that needed that much opioid to control their pain, when they were all of a sudden told, look, we're going to have to cut this dose, in half or by 2/3, that when you do that, especially if you do it too quickly and if you don't introduce alternative mechanisms for pain control, massage, acupuncture, chiropractic manipulation, NSAID, all of the other modalities, which at that time weren't necessarily covered by insurance, this was putting patients into this place where they're going to the doctor who's supposed to be the specialist to control their pain, and that doc is telling them, I am not allowed to give you what you're telling me is needed to control your pain. And so understandably, a lot of them turn to the illicit market. And so what we've seen over the last few years is that a larger and larger proportion of the overdoses and the problems have arisen from people taking medications like heroin or illegal fentanyl that they're acquiring on the illicit market. And the pendulum is always swinging back and forth in medicine, right? So we're all eagerly awaiting the updated guidelines from the CDC. I think a lot of advocacy groups and pain specialists and other stakeholders have weighed in pretty heavily about what the impact of those original guidelines were. And so we're expecting that those will shift, back towards putting a personalized needs of the particular patient first, and trusting that the doctor can make the appropriate decision with some guidelines that are always helpful, right? I mean, we want to be able to look at the data through an objective lens and always be incorporating, that into our clinical practice. So, evidence-based medicine is the catch term for that.
Yeah.
So, but it really, when it comes down to especially pain, for which, there's no painometer, right? Like I can't hook up an electrode to your back and say, oh yeah, you're a 95 pain out of 100. That you definitely need more of the medicine, right? So it comes down to more of a subjective. You talk to the patient, you ask them what kind of function they have, if this is helping, you use the scales of how bad is the pain. And you really, a lot of the decisions are based on the subjective feedback that you're getting from the patient. So that, that in and of itself makes this a difficult field to be in, because there aren't good objective tests and measures to see, is the pain controlled, is it not controlled? But even
then, if we could assess that, are opioids the best way to go? I mean, they're highly addictive, right?
Highly addictive. And so this is another, your initial question about, how did this all get started? I can remember, I'll tell you, the day when I was in med school, we had a pain specialist. He was there, he was teaching on a Purdue-sponsored educational program. And he both lectured and showed us a video that said multiple times that if a patient has a legitimate indication for an opioid analgesic, there is far less than a 1% chance of addiction or any adverse outcomes, which could not be further from the truth. What we know now is that, addiction and tolerance are two very different things. Tolerance is universal. If you take an opioid and you take it for long enough and you're taking it every day, the amount that's required to get to the same level of pain control gradually increases.
Yeah.
Right. And we do develop tolerance to some of the other effects in the body, but they develop at a much different rate. So in other words, one of the scarier and more deadly hazards of opioids is this respiratory depression. If I, for example, were to take a giant 120 milligram OxyContin pill right now, I probably would never wake up, right? Because I'm not an opioid patient. But a lot of patients, that's, over time where they've been titrated to. And so usually it's okay for them to do that. And they're not, they're not suppressing their breathing to the point that they have an adverse outcome. But that tolerance develops to a not as robust a degree as the tolerance to the pain control. So as you keep titrating and moving forward, you start to get a dissociation between those curves. And the further you move along, that x-axis, if that's the dose, the broader, the wider that dissociation between those curves becomes. And you definitely start getting into a danger zone where the dose of the medication required to provide the pain control is definitely in the range where it's going to be suppressing the respiratory drive, the ventilatory drive, which again is generally the mechanism of death and overdose. So the problem with opioids has been driven largely, or at least to a significant extent, by these unscrupulous practices that were in widespread use by the pharmaceutical industry in the early 2000s to about 2010, even to the point where, you know, there was Purdue managed to have something written into the indication, in the labeling of OxyContin. Now, FDA labeling is an exquisitely controlled process.
Yeah.
You cannot get onto a drug label that this does something without a robust body of evidence to prove that, right?
Mm-hmm.
They, with no evidence to prove it, other than quote unquote expert opinion, were able to insinuate into the FDA, into the labeling claims that OxyContin is believed to be associated with a lower risk of abuse and dependence because of its extended release profile, for which there was never any data or evidence to support. Turns out the FDA examiner who put that into the labeling claims then very quickly left the FDA and went to work for Purdue for a nice big fat paycheck. So, you know,
talk to us about the FDA for those of us, and I'm probably ignorant to exactly what the FDA's role here is, but what is the FDA?
Yeah, FDA is the Food and Drug Administration in the United States. So that's the agency, the regulatory agency that governs approvals of different medications. So,
okay, and you're saying that the FDA's got a very rigorous process before anything gets approved.
Extremely rigorous for approval, as well as what we refer to as label claims. Mm-hmm. So the things in that package insert that, you know, nobody reads, you throw it away. It's that folded up thing that's, you know, 20 pages long. But, you know, docs are familiar with that. We do look at that. And those are that's supposed to be the body of evidence that the patient population that it works in, this is the magnitude of the benefit that was seen in the clinical trials. These were the adverse events. These are the risks. So that's intended to be something that informs the physician's decision-making process about whether to use this medication or not, and whether the benefits are going to outweigh the risk. And really, you know, that's a question that should be asked anytime any medicine is started in any human, especially if we're going to be putting this chemical into your body every single day for an extended period, right?
Yeah.
So
oxytocin was then pushed through, and to help deal with the opioid addictions.
Well, so oxycodone was already approved.
Okay.
But what they did was the OxyContin, which kind of for continuous release, right? What they did in that nefarious way was, without any data, and clearly in retrospect, which was some sort of, you know, bribe or other, you know, back alley kind of agreement with the FDA person that was in charge of setting those label claims and those indications, they were able to insert something that was not true, that was not supported by evidence, that the risk of addiction, abuse, overdose was lower in the continuous release formulation of the drug. And so, you know, that was something that the drug reps would then, you know, pound over and over and over when they were detailing the docs, and it created this false sense of, oh yeah, these are much safer. So the point was that there were many levels on which the marketing strategy that was used to really just sell as many of these drugs as possible. And, you know, to hell with what the social impact is going to be, to hell with whether it's in the best interest of the patient or not. This is what's going to drive our revenues and our profits. That's what led to largely to the dramatic escalation in overdoses and what we now refer to as the opioid crisis, which since 2017 is officially a national public health emergency in the United States.
Wow. Okay. I can go off tangent here, but I won't. I'll stay on track.
Yeah, there's a lot of substrate here. I mean, you know, like I said, it's a very entrenched and multi-dimensional problem. And
well, I'm interested now with the vaccinations that are going on, and obviously this is maybe outside your field, but has the FDA given their approval here for these vaccinations to be administered as they are being globally and quite in a mandated sort of way?
Yeah, the COVID vaccine. So the Pfizer vaccine was FDA approved. That's what you're referring to?
That was only just recently approved, wasn't it?
Yeah. And
in your opinion, was there enough evidence in that?
Yes, I think there was, and I think that they were waiting for a 6-month data conclusion from the
Mm.
people that were enrolled in the clinical trials, and so that's pretty standard. But these were not standard world events, right? We were living through a largely unprecedented time, and
Yeah.
so I thought that because a lot of the holdouts, at least in the States, that people, when I say holdouts, people that were reluctant to or have not yet gotten the vaccination, a lot of that was political for some reason. People who leaned a certain way are against vaccines and against masks, and people on the other side of the political spectrum are for them,
Mm.
even though there's no reason to conflate the politics with the science here. But the point being, the FDA had hundreds of millions of data points from the people that had, in what we would call post-marketing studies, so people that had gotten the vaccine through the emergency use authorization. And, for what, 9 months, that data was available. I was very eager for them to sort of get moving on, yes or no, this is approved or it's not approved, because, we've been putting a lot of the onus on the unvaccinated, and I think it's important to remember that it is to the people who are, well, I don't want the government to, be tracking me with the microchips that they're putting in these vaccines. Okay, that's a fringe sort of position,
Yeah.
and I don't think there's much to argue there. But people who said, look, we have a government agency that is intended to decide whether these things are safe and effective, and they have not yet decided. I think that was a reasonable position to take. And so
So is
I
that with all
really
the
hope that
vaccinations
now,
now, or is that just with the Pfizer?
just the Pfizer was, I believe, the Moderna vaccine just applied for full approval.
Okay. Yeah, the
Yeah.
AstraZeneca one here in Australia is the one that's being administered predominantly, I believe, but then Pfizer as well.
Yeah, and that's so a lot of times they'll do what's called an emergency use authorization.
Yeah.
So you can sell these and market them, but they're basically saying that we wash our hands of this if
Any
anything goes
liability.
wrong.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is a concern.
Yeah, exactly. And so, while I personally disagreed because, but I'm a scientist and I can look at data and I can make my own decision and feel confident that it's an informed decision.
Mm.
And I think that, some of the institutions that have played such a critical role in this country for so many decades and that have garnered so much trust, that I think it's reasonable for the people that aren't in a position to make those, data analytics on their own. I think it's reasonable for them to wait and see what the experts say. So,
But I guess
yeah,
if we
hopefully
could go
we'll
back to
see.
the oxytocin, was it oxycodone?
OxyContin
OxyContin, sorry.
was the
If we
kind of the
go back to
prototype.
that and see how that's gone through the FDA, um,
Yeah,
it's
and
possible again that the right people funding things like this, and I don't want to be a conspiracist here, but this could happen again. And we could have another crisis on our hands, like the opioid in 20 years' time.
yeah, that's a really interesting point, Lee. And I think the more that we privatize these sorts of functions, the more liability there is for that.
Mm.
And one of the I think biggest tragedies, irrespective of where you fall on the political spectrum and
Yeah.
who you voted for president and whatnot. One of the really tragic things that happened politically in this country over the last 4 years was that there was such erosion of confidence in the institutions that have been so stellar, like I said, for
Yeah.
decades in this country. I mean, all of a sudden, the G-men at the FBI were the deep state, and they were plotting to overthrow this and that, and the EPA is not really trying to protect the water that you drink, and I mean, these are things we should be able to take for granted, honestly. Like you live in Michigan and you've got a little kid, and you should be able to go drink water from the faucet and not get brain damage. That's going to limit his lifelong potential, right? But because there was a private for-profit company that was insinuated into that process that decided, hey, we'd save a bunch of money if we stop putting this thing that causes the lead to come off of the pipes into the water.
Yeah, so when it becomes about
so
profits rather than the protection of the people, that's when we can have some issues. And I guess that's where maybe the public is concerned right now. But going well off track here, going back to the opioid pandemic, epidemic.
Yeah, epidemic. And again, I think it is becoming a worldwide problem. So soon enough, if not already, I think.
Well, I don't see it. I don't see it. I mean, I don't hear of it or notice it, and I probably don't put my attention there either here in Australia. But over in the States, I mean, it's huge, isn't it? The overdose of opioids.
It's monumental, Lee.
And has it gotten bigger with this crisis as well?
It's gotten so much worse. So last year, the provisional data that was released by the CDC through their vital statistics program showed that last year we were at just under 70,000 specifically opioid-related overdose deaths. Like 69,700, something like that. That's higher than much higher than we've ever had in a single year all throughout this crisis. And a lot of that was driven by the fact that with reduced access to care, with people turning more to the illicit market, the inflooding of illegal fentanyl, et cetera, that's been flooding the streets, that accounted for a very large proportion of these. But still, the number of people that are dying from a medicine that's prescribed from a doc is still staggeringly high. And, we all take an oath, right? It's one of the most fundamental parts of what we say we're going to do with our careers, which is we're going to do no harm, right? We're not going to harm our patient. And, that simplifies things a little bit because, if a patient has cancer and needs to get a surgery or they're going to die from the cancer, there's a risk of the surgery, right? They might be harmed in it. But the point is, we're always supposed to be balancing risk benefit and prioritizing the importance of not harming our patients. And so from that standpoint, to look at how many people are dying from prescription medications, meds that are coming from a doc, it was just, for me, from a professional level, just unacceptable. And that was one of the forces that led me to start SafeRX. The other was from a more personal level, and this was in the very early days of the opioid crisis, 1999, New Year's Eve. A dear friend of mine in the prime of her life, beautiful, wonderful, talented, smart, funny, just buoyant person, Andy. She went to a New Year's Eve party. She took her prescribed dose. She had an ankle injury. Her doc prescribed her a dose of OxyContin. She took the prescribed dose of OxyContin and had a few drinks at this party. And again, when those two substances are combined in the body at the same time, opioids and alcohol, they induce this, what's called a synergistic response. So you can think of it as like instead of a 10 plus 10 equals 20 type of an effect, you get more of a 10 times 10 is 100 type of an impact on the nervous system, right? So there's much more intense suppression of the nervous system, suppression of the breathing drive, and she fell asleep and never woke up. And so, that was something I carried along very close to my heart for quite a while.
That's going back a couple of decades now.
Yeah, a couple of decades. And, this was finally, I had an event, like so many of the important things in life, Lee, I think it arises as kind of a confluence of heartbreak and serendipity, right? Like the heartbreak was with Andy, and after her, there were two other friends of mine that not as close, but pretty close friends that passed again from prescription opioid overdose.
Wow.
And And just to hammer home a point here, this particular mistake, this specific dimension of the opioid crisis that we're targeting at SafeRX with our alcohol-resistant opioids, this accounts for another death in this country every 2.5 hours, all year long, right? So I mean, we're talking about thousands and thousands of people who die because they make this all too common mistake that docs currently have no way of preventing their patients from making. So the patient always gets the education, they get the warnings, and not just from the physician. Usually the pharmacist who's dispensing the medication will go through the importance of that. Usually it's stamped in a bright yellow, sticker right on the bottle in all capital letters, and do not drink alcohol with this medication. But what the data shows is that more than a third, anywhere from 36 to 81%
Guilty.
of people who are on long-term opioid, but you're not on an opioid.
No, I'm not.
So,
But like with antibiotics or things like that.
yeah, well, true, right. And so if you drink with your metronidazole, which is also a partial aldehyde dehydrogenase inhibitor, like the disulfiram in our medications, yeah, you'll get really sick and you'll feel lousy, but it's not going to induce this synergistic response where you stop breathing, right? So yeah, there are a lot of drugs that you don't want to drink with because it can cause a reaction, but the ones that are central nervous system depressants, like benzodiazepines, opioids, barbiturates, those compounds are extraordinarily dangerous when they're mixed with alcohol because, again, of this synergistic reaction that develops. And so, with that being the target, we've developed this platform of what we refer to as alcohol-resistant opioids. Very simple concept. They're combination products. So they're 2-in-1 pills. In addition to the opioid analgesic of choice, we're starting with 104, we added an effective dose of this medication called disulfiram. Disulfiram is an FDA-approved alcohol deterrent. If it's in your system and you consume alcohol, within about 10 minutes, you're in a world of pain. You're not having a fun time anymore. What it does is it interferes with an intermediary enzyme involved in the metabolism, in the breakdown of alcohol. And so when you inhibit that enzyme, you get a buildup of the product that the enzyme converts. So in this case, it's something called acetaldehyde. And acetaldehyde is basically it's the stuff that hangovers are made of, right? So you block the enzyme, you get this really robust increase in the acetaldehyde concentrations is within about 10 or 15 minutes. And that induces this really noxious constellation of effects. So first you get flushed and sweaty, and then you get dizzy, and the room starts spinning a bit, and then you get a pounding headache, and then you get this severe nausea and vomiting, right? And at that point, it's kind of hard to keep drinking. So the party is over, so to speak. So what these medicines will do is, number one, they prevent the patient from drinking to the point of increasing their blood alcohol concentration, which when combined with the opioid is going to put their body into that danger zone. And it also is a reminder, hey, let's not do this again in the future, right? So it gives the patient a very straightforward choice. Look, if you've got a severe pain condition that requires an opioid, by all means, take the medication your doctor prescribed, but take it as your doctor prescribed without alcohol. You can either take it the way your doctor prescribed it, or you can drink, but you can no longer do both, or you're going to get really sick really quickly. Simple as that.
If these opioids and this medication, I get it. If people are in severe pain, then yeah, it might be a wise idea. But if these have all been approved and they're being administered as they have been for the last couple of decades or more, isn't there an issue there with what we're approving? Like there's obviously clear addiction associations with the opioids, and then there's clear consequences that if people without the right knowledge or with the knowledge and just without the right processes, which most people can't have, because if you like to drink and you go to a party and you're on opioids, you're probably going to do it anyway. There's a big problem there.
Yeah. So, on the one hand, the question about opioid overprescribing is definitely a problem that needs to be addressed through, like most of these things, through a multimodal approach. But I want to be careful here because there are a number of chronic pain conditions and patients who suffer with chronic pain who do not achieve adequate pain control with anything other than an opioid, right? These are by far the most potent analgesics that are available to the human body. And so
What percentage of the
the
US population do you think are on prescribed opioid use?
great question. So the percentage it has changed a bit over the last few years. And again, that has to do with more people going to the illicit market. It's probably about 10 to 15%. But of those, the patients who, the guy who goes in and gets the wisdom teeth removal and has, opioids prescribed for 2 or 3 days or something like that, that's the minority. When we're talking about the quantity and where are most of these opioids going, most of them are going to what we call chronic opioid patients that have chronic pain that are getting the prescription filled every month, 12 months a year, and for years and years on end. And those are the patients in which that tolerance develops that we were speaking about earlier, where the danger zone for overdose and other adverse events increases exponentially. And they're the patients that, at least based on the data that's out there, are most likely to ignore their physician's recommendations to avoid alcohol with it, right? So if your doc tells you, hey, we're going to start this new thing for a few days while you're recovering from that broken ankle, you really can't drink on this, or you might die. The chances are you're probably going to take that to heart and not drink for a few days, right, while you're on the medicine. But the people who are taking it every day, years on end, nowadays we get so inundated with all of these warnings, right? There's warnings about everything, and some of them, frankly, are asinine. Like, if you're allergic to Emgality, don't take Emgality. Oh, well, thank you. Let me stop listening now, right? Because, that was an obvious thing that some lawyer that was trying to make sure that we were not exposing ourselves to liability said we needed to include into the warnings. And so, I think we do get bombarded with a lot of this, and not just from a medical legal standpoint, but, in terms of, all of the aspects of our daily life and interacting with corporate America or what have you. We're signing waivers and we're accepting liability, or we're accepting warnings and things like that all the time. And, often, it's just scroll to the end, accept, boom. And so, there's some level of desensitization, I think, to some of the warnings that we get.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But this is one that the data definitely shows that it should be, pumped out there loud on the PA system, because it's definitely something that, again, is all too easy a mistake to make, and all too commonly a fatal mistake.
So there might be a better way to allow these people in severe pain to have opioids without the consequences of overdose.
Right.
Reducing
and that's
the risk.
just it. So again, we have not developed a silver bullet for the opioid crisis. What we have developed is a solution to a major dimension of this crisis that has to date gone totally ignored by the pharmaceutical industry. So this is per the CDC, which is the gold standard in terms of epidemiology. Epidemiology being the science of how many people die from what causes, so it's like statistics about health outcomes and what's driving those outcomes. So based on the CDC data, gold standard data, 22.1% of prescription opioid overdose fatalities occur not because the patient is, crushing up the pill and snorting it, or dissolving it and injecting it into their vein, or because they're taking a big handful of the pill. It's because they make this all too common mistake of drinking alcohol while the opioid is in their system.
Right.
So And that's almost a quarter, right? So it's a major dimension of the crisis. And it's something that, while it's not going to be the end-all, be-all answer, would save, again, another
Perhaps
life in this
a
country
part of the
about every
solution.
2.5 hours, thousands of people per year. Yeah.
So the company SafeRX, Michael, if people listening to this episode want to find out a bit more about your company or research, how can they best do that?
Thanks for that question. So SafeRXPharmaceuticals.com. You don't even have to type the www anymore. HTTPS, I think. And we've also, if listeners, want to join us in this mission and want to, become a part of the solution or part of a solution and want to invest in the company, we recently opened a crowdfunding campaign. And information for that can be found at www.investinsafrx.com.
Nice one. Cool, insightful, interesting topic. Thanks for coming on the show today, Michael, and sharing. Appreciate it. Thank
you, Lee. And let me tell you also, I really like the name of this show. It's a very evocative title. The Hidden Why. I think it's a question that most of us are asking and don't even really know that we're asking it. So it's
or opposite.
It gave me a little kick. Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you, Michael. And guys listening, as always, you know where to go, thehiddenwhy.com. Until next time, peace, passion, and purpose. See you soon. Thanks, guys, for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed what you heard. I hope you love what you're hearing. If you like this episode, guys, or any of the episodes that you're listening to here at The Hidden Why, please do me a favor by sharing it. You can share it with your families, you can share it with your loved ones. You can do that by using your favorite social media channels, using the icons on the platform that you're listening to the Hidden Why podcast. Also, guys, if you're a fan of the show, please connect with me. Connect with me at thehiddenwhy.com. I love to hear from you. I love to converse with the people that listen to this show to find out what they enjoy, what they don't enjoy, and perhaps if they have any questions or feedback for the show as well. You can stay up to date with all that I'm releasing here, guys. I do a solo show every Monday, a 3-minute thought every Thursday. I do 2 interviews a week on a Wednesday and a Saturday, and a book review every Friday. You can stay up to date with all that by subscribing to my newsletter at thehiddenwhy.com. Just enter your email address there, and also subscribing to the podcast on the platform that you choose to listen to your podcasts. You can also support the show, guys, by using the Amazon links at thehiddenwhy.com. So if you like books, you can get all the books that I review there, and anything else really that you like to purchase through Amazon. So use that link, it helps support the show. And we've also got a deal with Audible, guys. Audible is a fantastic way to listen to all your favorite books. We've got a deal with them so you can get 2 free books when you subscribe, or subscribe to a 30-day free trial. So check that out again at thehiddenwhy.com. Guys, that's it from me. You know what to do. Go out there, breathe more passion into every single moment. Do everything with greater purpose, and in doing so you will discover your hidden why. This is The Hidden Why. My name's Lee Martinuzzi. Until next time, peace, passion and purpose. See you soon.